Merci.
Alignment isn't necessarily getting on board on a train that someone else is taking. It's getting clarity on a common vision of what we're doing so we all believe and trust and understand it. So yes, alignment is one of the critical issues that gets skipped because so many leaders think that when you tell people to do something, they'll actually take action. And so clarifying and ensuring alignment actually ensures your strategy won't get stuck.
Hi, I'm Dr. Irena O'Brien, and you're listening to Neuroscience of Coaching. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist with almost 30 years of study and practice in psychology and neuroscience. And as the founder of the Neuroscience School, I teach coaches and other wellness professionals real-world, evidence-based strategies to use in their own practices. In each episode, I invite a seasoned coach to discuss a topic that affects our field, and together we provide you with science-based tools to help your clients reach their goals by working with their brains to create results that last. Today we're talking about something every coach and leader faces, helping people change, and why that's often so hard. Contrary to what we've been told, resistance to change isn't just about fear or stubbornness. Neuroscience reveals that our emotional state plays a huge role in how we engage with transformation. When people feel curious, inspired, and supported, their brains open up to new ideas. When they feel stressed or pressured, the brain narrows its focus, prioritizes short-term safety, and pushes back. This is why I love the quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, most famously the author of the book The Little Prince. He said, "If you want to build a ship, don't herd people together to collect wood and assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea." His quote applies perfectly because we operate between two powerful emotional states that shape how we experience change: the positive emotional attractor, or PEA, and the negative emotional attractor, or NEA. These aren't just psychological labels, they're neurological modes that activate different brain networks. The PEA, triggered by things like purpose, possibility, and supportive relationships, activates the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for visioning, creativity, and long-term thinking. It's what helps us imagine a better version of ourselves and feel motivated to become it. On the other hand, the NEA activates the task positive network, responsible for a laser focus, critical thinking, and problem solving. It's great for getting things done in a pinch, but if we stay there too long, it can lead to stress, tunnel vision, and resistance. And here's the kicker. These two brain networks actually suppress each other. So when you're stressed and focused on the next urgent task, your brain literally can't access the expansive thinking needed for growth. That's why change efforts fall flat when they start with pressure and performance metrics instead of vision and connection. So the key for coaches and leaders is knowing how to toggle between these states. Start with the PEA. Help your clients or teams connect with their ideal self, a compelling vision of who they want to become, and build that emotional resonance. Then use the NEA strategically to set deadlines, solve problems, and drive action. In today's episode, we'll unpack how this emotional toggling works in the brain, why vision is a more powerful driver of change than fear, and how you can help your clients lead and live from a more empowered, inspired place. My guest today is Susan Schramm, founder of Go-to-Market Impact, a consulting firm that helps CEOs and boards de-risk bold strategies so they can get results faster. She's a seasoned executive with leadership experience at IBM, Siemens, and Nokia, and now works with purpose-led organizations across sectors. Susan brings a unique blend of strategic insight and heart, investing in leaders who want to create real impact without losing themselves in the process. Susan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for including me in this amazing community you built.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. So let's start by sharing with us a little background on what led you to be interested in organizational change. Was there a particular experience you had, or maybe some kind of eye-opening moment?
Well, the eye-opening moment happened over time. I spent most of my career leading launches of new things, linking someone's big idea with how to make it reality. And as you mentioned, I work with Fortune 500 companies and startups and small companies and nonprofits. And I kept seeing the same thing over and over again. Really good ideas would get stuck. Not because the strategy was wrong, but because people weren't clear, they weren't aligned, or they weren't ready to take action. And things would just falter. And it wasn't a technical issue, it was a human one. And over time, I got really frustrated. Really good ideas to solve really important problems in our world falter. And the result is you've got wasted, not just wasted money, which people think of, but wasted human energy. And teams get disillusioned and less likely to take on the next hill. And so it hit me one day that what if it doesn't have to be this way? What if these leaders could apply some fundamentals and avoid the common mistakes I kept seeing them make and make a difference? I see myself as a leverage point. I could help. I'm on a mission to help visionary leaders turn bold ideas into results and avoid these common mistakes so we can get the world's problems solved faster. And when I started doing research into brain science, truthfully, I realized that this was how we were wired. This was something that wasn't simply an organizational insight from McKinsey or something. This was actually fundamentally a human issue. So even a great strategy will fail when people are confused and skeptical and not aligned. And so that's why I decided it was my focus of my business. I focus on helping leaders address this people side of risk of new strategies, which is always underestimated.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, people approach change differently depending on their emotional state, either in a creative, possibility focused mode or a stress driven problem solving mode. So, how do you see these show up in leadership teams?
Well, you've probably been in those rooms too. You can feel the difference in a room, right? And I often am brought in to help get initiatives back on track. And in those moments, there's a lot of stress. There's defensiveness. There tends to be a deflated sense of energy and even silence, which is often the most dangerous when there's silence, right? But when people, the most important thing I can do is help them go back to the possibilities of what they're creating, why they're doing it, what the outcomes they're trying to do. And you can actually see physically a difference where people start to create energy in the room. They're more curious. They'll start to speak faster. And you have created a new possibility mindset. And so my role actually in working with organizations is to help create room for that energy and create space for the creative side. But that does mean addressing what people are fearful of and the risks in a way that can be productive.
So, you're already applying Boyatz's research, right? Before you even read the book.
Yeah, that's right. When we talked the other day, you brought this up, and I thought, oh, I looked into this Boyatz's principles and the ideal self, right? This idea of co-creating a shared vision of an ideal self. And it's interesting because that is fundamental to creating a good strategy. You start with clarity among groups of people on what is it we're doing here. It's what I call the why now principles, so that people can say, what problem are we solving? What's the outcome when we do? Why do we need to solve it now? And what's the consequence if we don't? And those elements of why or purpose sort of get clarity beyond the vision. I mean, sometimes the vision is at a conceptual level. And the way I've applied this ideal self to a business environment, organizational environment, is clarify as clear as we can the reality of what it is we're trying to create as outcomes. That's one element of his approach. There's a whole bunch that were just really well aligned.
Yeah. And also to get your people aligned with that, right? Aligned with the corporate vision.
Right. And alignment is funny because I remember one day a leadership group just said, get on board or get out of the room. I mean, it was just one of those deals, right? So alignment isn't necessarily getting on board on a train that someone else is taking. It's getting clarity on one page on a common vision of what we're doing so we all believe and trust and understand it. So yes, alignment probably at the end of the day is one of the critical issues that gets skipped. And the reason it gets skipped is because so many leaders think that when you tell people to do something, they'll actually take action. And so clarifying and ensuring alignment actually ensures your strategy won't get stuck. But many, many times in a typical organizational model where leaders think that hierarchy drives outcomes, they're very flabbergasted when people didn't do what they told them to do. So And by the way, parents also get flabbergasted when
Yeah.
their kids don't do what they tell them to do.
Yeah, that I had that thought too.
The alignment
So,
can happen in a family or in an organization.
however, I have a funny story that when we got our dog, once he got out of the puppyhood, I thought one day I looked, I go, "Oh my god, this is someone who actually listens to me and does what I say."
I love this dog. That's true. Oh, and it's funny because let's just take that thread. So, what do you do in an organization where people listen to you and do it and there is a likelihood that you, having realized that someone listened to you and worked with you, you're more likely to engage, right?
Yes.
And one of the things we're finding is that if you organizationally have teams where the extroverts, say all the extroverts are real excited, and people aren't actively listening for those who aren't speaking up, right? They're not actively soliciting their input. Over time, those people will not take action either, right? So sometimes your puppy probably didn't talk to you as much as, but what we find is if you're not intentional about soliciting people's point of view and aligning together, you will be very surprised down the road when people you thought were on board because they didn't say anything are actually not taking action and things are just going slower than you'd like.
So you really need to create space for the introverts to talk and give their opinion.
You do.
So one thing that I find really hard is when I get on a Zoom call and they say, "Oh, it's informal here. Just start talking. You don't have to raise your hand, your virtual hand." I can't do that because I'm always too late, right? Because I'm still forming my thoughts. And then by the time my thoughts are formed, they've moved on to another topic.
And, it's interesting. I learned personally something during the COVID where we were all doing things virtually and we used the chat.
Yeah.
And I remember one organizational integration. We had a client of mine who bought a whole bunch of companies and we're trying to create a common strategy with people from all over the world. And they said, well, we can't hold these sessions you're talking about because we can't get together during COVID. And I said, absolutely. We can get together right now virtually. Well, here's the unexpected benefit of that. First of all, I always send out to people the questions so they have a chance to think about it and capture their ideas. So we always start with a survey or a set of gathering steps so that those people who need to think about it for a while get the opportunity to. And then we consolidate those together anonymously, by the way, so that people can see the picture and the range of perspectives that have just been brought together. Then when we get on live on Zoom, the fascinating thing is the chat boxes allow people who might not jump in and talk the opportunity to frame their words in a way that they can express themselves. And you get much richer insights sometimes by giving people tools to express themselves without the high energy person running right over them. So very important to ensure listening and perspectives that often are going to be really critical down the road that you might not have thought about.
And I bet that encourages alignment also, or that leads to alignment.
Well, what's interesting, it leads first to ahas, insights, and then to alignment. Many of my CEO clients are very passionate about their vision, right?
Mhm.
Especially the startups. I've got this thing going on, right? And they sometimes perceive that when people bring up risks, that it's a Debbie Downer, right? Or a David Downer, okay, whatever. But it's it's pushback. And what's interesting is in this model where you are actively asking people to identify their view of the outcomes created and the consequences if not, or their view of the risks associated with it, without them having to push it in a boss's face, but giving sort of visibility to it, the senior leaders tend to start to see dimensions that they otherwise wouldn't see, whether that's because of their background or because of the people's more familiarity on the front line, but just giving a richer perspective as to what's going on now and where the possible roadblocks might be, starts to create common understanding. And from common understanding and clarity about assumptions you're making, then suddenly you can start to get alignment. And that assumptions thing is interesting because so many times people will project a point of view and we don't understand the assumptions behind it. We skip asking, why do you say that? What assumption are you making? And those assumptions come back to bite you later on.
Yeah. Yeah. So when a team is stuck in urgency or fear, how can leaders shift the tone without losing momentum?
Well, so some of the way, and fear is funny because it shows up differently. One of the things I've found is that just creating an open environment that you can talk about risk on a regular basis, sometimes that doesn't make sense, but it's maybe counterintuitive, but just creating an environment where you talk about what if can actually help people get over fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very fond of the pre-mortem idea. You're probably familiar with, we always talk about postmortems when things go wrong.
Yep.
Let's talk about pre-mortems. And I like to make them fun, like a disaster movie, like you're watching Titanic. And you encourage people to openly talk about the different things that might happen. And it's less personal.
Yep.
People sometimes don't bring things up because there's the elephant in the room they don't want to say because it's politically risky. But if you can create environments where it's actually encouraged to bring up things that might be changing in your environment, and those are good and bad. Like, what if we got the big order we weren't ready for and we suddenly can't deliver, right? I mean, there can be good things and there can be concerns. But if you create that as a regular rhythm, and everybody knows that at the end of each meeting, you say, what risks have we not talked about that we should be addressing? They realize that they're welcome. They also realize, by the way, if you start working on what would you do, then you're taking away the fear. I learned, I'm not a brain scientist, Irena, but I have learned that the brain without a plan starts to get into fight or flight mode. And so if you can do that what ifing and create hey, what would we do for grins? What would we do if, our biggest customer or our biggest supplier no longer was available? That starts to give your brain confidence that there's a game plan for that. And little by little, the fears and unspoken concerns start to be more comfortably discussed. And, oh, yeah, that's what we do. And it creates a more resilient team.
I think maybe, although I'm not sure, but I think that maybe you're also encourage them to get into the PEA, so the positive emotional attractor and the default mode network, because it's a creative process.
And it's co-created, to your point. So it actually, people spin on it. One of the foundational elements of the system I use, the de-risk system for impact, I start with this why now exercise, and I recommend it for every organization, whether you're an individual or a team of 2 people or a team of 50. And that's idea of why, what problem are we solving and what's the outcome if we do? And you're right, that's got to tee into this vision, this brain science that helps them get more married, excited about the possibilities. And the only difference I'd say between the fluffy vision posters on the walls in customer meetings, right? You walk around buildings and it's like, we're going to change the world and people will be happy and fed and all that stuff. And those are wonderful because they create high level vision, but they don't calm fears when they don't see a plan, right? So what I find is if you go one step down, which is this idea of why and why now, it helps get more specific. And it helps create more energy because you say, for instance, you start getting more specific for instances of how that will play out and what the world they're creating as an outcome will be. And you're right, the energy just pops back up.
Yeah. So I just want to go back to the pre-mortem and just to add something else to that pre-mortem. No, I am sure that by doing the pre-mortem, because it's all theoretical, right? They're not actual. And so it can even be fun.
For sure. I always introduce aliens as part of the exercise. They don't usually expect it, but I'll in the middle say, okay, aliens arrive. And what are we going to do about it, right? So it can be fun.
Yeah, and so they're going back into the PEA, the positive emotional attractor, and being in the positive emotional attractor, that is what creates the energy for change.
Yeah. And, I find this idea of energy, everybody expresses their energy differently, but it's also capacity. So many times a leader will come back in with some big new idea and they won't acknowledge that their people are already flat out working. And they'll say, hey, we got this new initiative. And if you don't stop and step back and clarify what it is and where it fits in your overall strategy, then the energy that you need for them to execute will not be there. And if they can't openly say, well, I'm already working 10 hours a day, where will this fit in what I'm doing? Oh, this will eliminate half of what you're doing. Oh, suddenly people can get excited about it too. But I think sometimes the energy is not simply enthusiasm. Like when we talk about energy, sometimes we mean, oh, they're not really upbeat. They're not willing to be excited about this. Well, what if I'm tired and this is a really good idea. It just doesn't fit in all the things I'm doing. And that's another type of energy.
Yeah. So your de-risk system for impact is designed to uncover hidden risks. And so how do you help leaders see when the risk is actually emotional resistance, not just operational uncertainty?
Oh, that's an interesting one. When I started doing research on what is the common glue to all these launches going bad, like what is it when I go back and do postmortems, what's happening? Lots of times people will point to market windows being lost, or if, the operational processes not being accomplished, or sort of technical issues. And what I found, the glue was always people were unwilling to take action when they needed to. And those were emotional resistance, right? So what's interesting, I think sometimes, what can a leader do to tap into that? It is to, first of all, be vulnerable themselves. If a leader is actually openly saying, this change is going to require everyone change, including me, and I'm not really good yet at AI. Let's take that example. We're going to AI pump up all our processes and all this stuff. What change are we going to make? If you can, first of all, start with leaders acknowledging this change is going to be affecting everyone. And then this idea that the resistance people are feeling, acknowledge right up front, this is going to create something, everybody has to do something new. And when you do something new, it's uncomfortable. And so you openly say, what risk are we seeing we should be talking about? What are we going to have to change about what we do? What is this going to mean in terms of what we might feel uncomfortable or could embarrass ourselves? And you start using words that are more about the emotional reaction. Because at the end of the day, it's what are the fears people have? The fight or flight fears, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I look stupid. I may fail. I have a fear of failure. I'm going to have to work with people that I'm uncomfortable with. How am I going to deal with that? There's just a lot. I don't know what is expected of me. So I will fail. And these kind of things, if leaders get more comfortable bringing those up as, here's the possibilities when we're creating this change. All of us will go through that. I like the Bridges transformation model where he talks about how when you go from different states, this middle state where you're neither in the old world, but you're not in the new. And that's actually a time where people can maybe hear you. But that first step is, I'm in denial of this change. I don't like it. And if we can help people ahead of time start acknowledging the kind of feelings they may have, you can make it safe for your teams to talk about feelings.
And a thing that Boyatzis says too is, and you're right, so change can be scary for people, especially when they have to learn new things, tasks, new strategies. So Boyatzis says too, to frame it in terms of learning. If leaders frame it in terms of learning, then that takes away a lot of that fear.
That's really good. And the curiosity and the learning can be part of the initiative you're starting. Many, many times, if you create that what if atmosphere from the beginning and like a regular rhythm of what if, it's a curiosity. And it does beg this idea of what are we learning about the market around us? What are we learning about our improvements? And sometimes there's a tendency to make that the last topic of a meeting. It needs to be brought up front a little bit. There needs to be time to reflect on that before you just rush off into your task list.
Exactly. So how do you help organizations define an ideal future state that genuinely inspires people?
Well, we talked about this a little bit, but one of the things that I find, especially when a strategy has gone wrong, like it gotten stuck, is that they've lost their grounding. And so that exercise of a structured purpose exercise where you talk about the from and the to of where you are today and where you're heading, and then allow people to identify in the what problem are we solving, who are we solving it for, what's the outcome if it's solved, what's the consequence if we don't, why do we have to solve it now, what's the consequence if we wait. What those questions do is they help everybody answer it from their perspective. And one of the things I'm finding is that when people really relate to the impact that they can have, they start to get very excited about that. Then what I do is I encourage them to do a what if later. What if we do all that and it's 5 years from now? What will have changed? And what about what we're doing will still sustain? And that's an interesting exercise to sort of future-proof your effort, because so many times you get all excited about this initiative or project or new tool or something you're about to run out. You say, oh, we're going to get this done. But the world changes around you. And if you as a group can start visioning together, what will have changed in 5 years? And will what we're doing still matter? And something about that really inspires people because they realize they're not working on something that's today's to-do list. They're working on impact. And that no matter what personality you are, you feel like if I wake up every day and take action, am I making a difference in this world? Do I matter? And that exercise of stretching the horizon to not just today's problem, but later, really can bring out new dimensions of what you might want to do. It also can help people connect who might not be connected today, but they could get excited if what they were doing was important over time.
And then that creates the energy for change. They have the energy to do all the implementation work. Yeah.
Right?
Wow. So, can you share an example where a leader leaned too heavily on execution and it backfired? And what helped turn the situation around?
Well, it's interesting because I could list 20 of them. So I was like, well, because this is a very common challenge when leaders use command and control models,
Yes.
right? And the bigger the organization, the more likely command and control works because it's so many people. You have to have some clarity of roles. But I think of one that really was interesting. I was part of a merger of two companies, and we were driving positioning in the market of why our company merged. And every employee in the company had to be able to say why this was done. And so, of course, corporate came up with some great answer. And my role actually was in sales and marketing, and I needed to make sure this made sense to customers real quickly. Otherwise, they start not trusting us. And what we found was that not one salesperson was using the standard line. People were uncomfortable saying what they were given. And I walked in and said, we're going to stop spending money on all these ads and all this marketing communication that says we're going to be this person. Let's go back to what we believe. Because what we're finding was, what they'd say? Well, we just got taken over or we just got merged. And I don't know, the guys in headquarters say, that's why. I don't really know what's going on. They keep me like a mushroom. Yeah, this terrible, terrible situation where our employees just were not confident in articulating why this merger was going to be good. So what did I do? I started with what they believed in. And we stepped back and said, what is it that you actually believe, then you tell your best friend that you would actually say we can do well. And we just started going back to the things that mattered, that they could say that they made a difference. And that's where, when I took those messages back to senior management and said, hey, you guys, look at what they would actually use as examples or as proof points, or some of the claims you're making that don't matter at all, that they think are lies. Let's work on the ones that we believe in. Suddenly, we ended up with people feeling very confident talking about it. And I'm thinking, how many times do we have these tops-down initiatives that just go flat? Whereas if you co-create and co-shape them, you might not have as wide a storyline, but you'll work on the ones that people would actually believe in and take action and trust. And that's how you get momentum.
So, it always goes back to vision.
I always go back to linking vision to this idea of what do I do next? That linkage.
Yes. So, it always goes back to that. Yeah. So, a key concept for moving forward through change is toggling between vision and execution.
Right, just as you said.
Yeah. So, how do you build this rhythm into strategic planning with clients?
So I encourage what I'd call this deliberate pause points, right? There's a tendency in project planning and new strategies to be very, project management systems are very methodological. And there's never enough time to have a conversation. And so I actually encourage teams to set time in agendas. Not every time you meet, but at least once a month, to step back and for a very purposeful moment, say, what is changing around us that we haven't talked about, whether that is internally or in the environment around us? What are we doing that is not serving our purpose? And where are our assumptions that we made not proving to be true? And just slowing down to have those kind of conversations is a very important part of creating this linkages as part of what they do. It also, I think, allows people to start getting good at scanning. If they know that every month there's going to be a conversation about this, they'll start scanning more effectively. They'll start being more comfortable when they see changes. They'll capture it, bring it back, and be more likely to bring it up. And they'll be more resilient. They'll start to get better at coming in with, hey, if this change is happening, say a change in the competitive landscape or a change in the product being used in different ways, they start to feel a sense of empowerment, actually, to say they're like scouts. You sort of create a group of people who are not only taking the vision and executing it like drones, but they are part of scanning for an obvious environment that will continue to change.
Yeah. So, what about starting just regular meetings with what's going well with the new strategy?
Perfect, right? Especially from a celebration point of view, and because there's going to be plenty of time in a typical meeting where you go into the weeds of the things, and starting with the successes, and also starting with personal victories as well as group victories, right?
Yes.
Sometimes there's a tendency to think that when you talk about the successes, you've got to talk about revenue or customer acquisition or something like that. But the idea that you talk first about who learned, go back to your learning point, right? Who learned something today, this week, that they're ready to share? Who had a victory with a conversation that was uncomfortable? Just things like that, who took a risk? Because when I talk a lot about openly, there's not a language for openly talking about risk. And that's, in fact, why I created the de-risk system for impact, to create words, to help people have language, to talk openly about it in not a personal, accusatory way. What about at the beginning of a meeting, talking about what's going well and who took a risk this week and what did you learn? That's a different kind of culture that you can change immediately.
And it takes very little effort to do that. It changes the whole tone of the meeting when you start it that way.
Can you imagine? I mean,
Yeah,
suddenly, instead of you coming in with your little task list that you're behind on and you're terrified, right? And instead, you're getting this invitation to think together, celebrate together, and openly talk about things that didn't go as well and what we're learning, as you say. Not what didn't go well and who do we fire, but it's what risks did we take, what bumps did we run into, and what do we learn from them?
exactly. Yeah.
I had one fascinating experience. I was with a very large company and I was in part of a senior management meeting where we were all brought in to report on our performance. And those who had poor performance had to start. They had it stack ranked. It was very scary. And so you're all sitting there very fearful. And suddenly one leader stops the meeting and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about failures. And you could have heard a pin drop because everybody assumed they were going to talk about you. You're like, oh my God, it's me. He's going to talk about. And he said, we're going to talk about failures we've had this year and what we learned from them. And I'm going to go first. And that conversation, as you can see, it was like 20 years ago. It changed my life because it suddenly invited everyone from being these defensive people who had to show up perfectly to almost like we were all scientists saying, oh, what caused that failure and what can we learn from it next time? And so we all became like coaches for each other, sharing our learnings. And that one leader really changed the world by stop action in what was known to be a grueling meeting that nobody looked forward to. It changed everything. So totally agree with you. Those opening comments can set the tone for a whole different kind of connection and energy.
And the way that leader started the meeting, so the way he started the meeting, the people at the meeting then became co-creators, right?
Right.
Yep.
And teammates, interestingly enough, when you're vulnerable like that, these were people from all over the world. And so we didn't work with each other every day. But that vulnerable moment where we all openly talked, and he led. See, that's my point. He led and shared the mistake. He said, I would say in this company, most people say I failed here. As he acknowledged, people blamed him for something, right? Let me explain how we got there and what I've learned from it and what I want to make sure everyone else learns. So that group of people now has shared their vulnerability. We became wonderful advocates for each other across the world because we suddenly had gone to a level that was way deeper than what we might have otherwise talked about.
Yeah. Yep. And finally, as we wrap up, right, for leaders or coaches listening today who are facing resistance to change, what's one mindset shift or action step they can try right now to get things moving again?
I would say simply from an alignment point of view, stop seeing silence as agreement and start inviting people to shape the outcomes you're creating and openly talk about risk. So instead of assuming that everybody is either on board or not, very quickly start openly talking about risk and inviting people to shape the possibilities with you. When people feel heard, they're just much more willing to take action. And it's a simple, simple thing. But this inviting people to show up in a way that's safe, in a way that they're invited to express their own personal point of view is a very simple thing you can do starting today with every meeting you're in.
Thank you, Susan. That's a great way to wrap up our conversation today. So what's the best way for listeners to learn more about you and your work?
Well, I'd say the first way would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be great. It's Susan Bailey Schramm in LinkedIn. Another way would be to go to my website, which is go-to-marketimpact.com. And I am coming out with a new book called Fast Track Your Big Idea, where what I do is I incorporate a lot of these ideas into a very practical guideline, whether you're stuck or whether you're launching something for the first time. And I'll be introducing that book shortly. So it'd be great to go there and get some updates on when the book's available or how to get special opportunities to apply those concepts from the book in your own world.
So, Susan, thank you so much for your time on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me into what is always a learning from me too. Every time I'm with you, Irena, I learn something new every time we're together, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope your big takeaway today is that change isn't about pushing harder or fixing what's broken. It's about reconnecting with what's possible. When we help people tap into a vision of their ideal self, grounded in purpose and passion, we activate the part of the brain wired for growth, creativity, and joy. Real transformation happens when we lead with inspiration, not just information. As coaches and leaders, we have the power to create the emotional conditions that make change not just achievable, but deeply fulfilling. Because when people feel seen, supported, and hopeful, they don't just change, they grow.